The wind carried the scent of salt and mystery as it swept through the small coastal town of Astra. Nestled between jagged cliffs and deep sapphire waters, Astra was a place untouched by time. Old sailors spoke of strange songs on moonlit nights, of shadows dancing beneath the waves, and of ancient secrets buried beneath coral and foam. Few paid attention. Most called it legend. But for 16-year-old Kael, the town felt like a calling. He had arrived from the bustling inland city to spend the summer with his uncle Marek, a grizzled old fisherman who had lived by the sea his entire life. Marek was quiet, as salty as the ocean itself, and spoke in riddles whenever Kael asked him about the sea. "Respect the water," he'd say, stroking his bristled beard. "She's got moods, secrets, and a memory longer than time." Kael didn't understand, but the words stirred something deep inside him, an unfamiliar sense of longing and fascination. Every evening, after helping with the day's catch, Kael would walk the beach alone. The golden sand stretched endlessly, scattered with polished shells, seaweed, and the footprints of gulls. The cliffs loomed high above like silent guardians, and the tide whispered to him with every retreating wave. It was on one of these dusky strolls, as the sky melted into lavender and indigo, that Kael first heard it. A song. Not music from a radio or distant home. This was different, soft, haunting, ethereal. It floated through the air like mist, curling around his thoughts and tugging at his heart. The melody had no words, yet it told a story of longing, freedom, and something ancient and sad. He stopped in his tracks. The beach was empty, or so he thought. Out by the rocks that jutted into the surf, he saw movement. A figure, slim, graceful, with long hair that shimmered silver blue under the fading light. She sat on the edge of the rock, her back to him, singing to the sea. Kael squinted. Was she real? The way she blended with the water, the way the waves didn't seem to touch her, it was as if she was part of the ocean itself. "Hey!" he called out, raising a hand. The figure turned slightly, startled. Her face was radiant, eyes that sparkled like pearls, skin glowing with a subtle iridescence. But the moment Kael blinked, she was gone. The rock was empty, the waves crashing like before. He rushed forward, but there was no sign of her. Only a faint ripple in the water and something smooth underfoot. Kael looked down and picked up a strange, luminous conch shell. It pulsed softly in his palm like it had a heartbeat. He held it to his ear instinctively. And there it was, the song again, clearer now. The same haunting melody that had drawn him across the sand. It echoed from within the shell as though the ocean itself was singing. Kael stood there mesmerized. He didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of a story that would change his life forever. A story of love that defied realms, of secrets too deep to measure, and of a girl who was more than she seemed. The sea had whispered her name into the tide. Lyra. For days after that strange encounter, Kael couldn't stop thinking about the girl. The way her voice echoed in the conch shell. The shimmer in her eyes before she vanished. It felt like a dream, yet the shell he kept hidden beneath his pillow proved otherwise. Each night, when the wind fell still and the stars winked overhead, he pressed it to his ear and let the melody drift into his thoughts. Kael was no poet, but something about her made him want to speak in verses. Something deep within him stirred, a yearning to find her again, to see her face, to hear her sing not just to the sea, but to him. On the 7th evening after the encounter, the sea was unusually calm. The air was cool, scented with jasmine and brine, and the sky was brushed in strokes of orange and mauve. Kael returned to the beach, this time with purpose. He carried the shell, a flashlight, and a heart full of questions. He wandered past the dunes and along the rocky shoreline, where seaweed tangled like mermaid hair and tide-pools glistened like mirrors. Then, out past the surf, he saw her again. She was swimming. Not like a normal swimmer, flailing or paddling. No, she moved like a creature of water, fluid, graceful, as if the ocean obeyed her every movement. Her arms cut through the surface with delicate strokes, and her long hair trailed behind her like a silver ribbon. Kael stepped closer to the water's edge, the waves licking at his boots. He didn't call out this time. He just watched, heart pounding. She turned, and for the first time, she looked directly at him. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. She floated still for a moment, as if weighing a decision. Then, slowly she swam toward the shore. Kael's breath caught. Every instinct in him screamed that this wasn't normal, that she wasn't normal. But he didn't move. When she reached a shallow point, she stopped, still half submerged. The moonlight caught her face. It was more breathtaking than he remembered. High cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of the deep ocean after a storm. Her skin gleamed like it had been kissed by starlight. "You kept the shell," she said softly. Kael blinked. "You're real." She tilted her head, amused. "Were you expecting a ghost?" "No," Kael said, stepping a little closer, careful not to startle her. "I thought I imagined you. But your voice, it's in the shell. Who are you?" "I'm Lyra," she said. "Kael," he replied. The pause. The waves whispered around them. "You shouldn't be here," she said, glancing back at the sea. "Why?" "Because the sea doesn't always forgive. And some things are better left unknown." Kael frowned. "Is that a threat?" Her eyes softened. "A warning. For your own good." He looked down at the shell in his hands. "I don't care about danger. I want to know more. About you." Lyra hesitated. Her expression was unreadable. Then, with a small smile, she lifted her hand and beckoned him to sit. Not too close, just near enough that they could speak as the tide lapped between them. And so they talked. 4 hours, until the moon rose high and the stars spilled across the sky. Lyra spoke of the tides, the colors of coral reefs, the song of whales, and storms that dance with lightning under the sea. Kael told her of cities, books, music, and the sky's colors at sunrise. They laughed, they listened, and for a few perfect hours, it felt like the world had shrunk to the space between them. But just before dawn, Lyra grew quiet. The tide had begun to pull back, whispering secrets only she could hear. "I have to go," she said, rising slowly. "Wait," Kael said, standing up too. "Will I see you again?" She paused. Her eyes glistened, and something unreadable crossed her face. "If the sea allows," she said softly. Then she turned and dove gracefully into the water. Kael ran to the edge, but she was already gone. Only the moonlit ripples remained, and the sound of her laughter, carried faintly by the breeze. Morning light spilled across the coast, golden and warm, but Kael barely noticed. The sleepless night clung to his shoulders like a wet cloak. He stood by the window of his uncle's weathered cottage, the glowing conch shell in his hands, replaying every word Lyra had said. "If the sea allows." He repeated her voice in his mind again and again, trying to decode the mystery behind her words, her eyes, her sudden disappearances. Uncle Marek watched him from the corner of the room while stirring a pot of fish stew. "You've got that look," he muttered, "like the sea put a hook in your heart." Kael blinked. "What do you mean?" Marek gave a slow, knowing nod. "I've seen it before. A boy falls for the ocean, starts staring into waves, hears voices in shells, dreams of women made of mist and water. Some don't come back the same." Kael's heart skipped. "Do you believe in them?" "Them?" Marek raised an eyebrow. "You mean merfolk?" He grunted. Believe it or not, the sea believes in herself. That's enough. You meddle in her stories, boy, and you might find you're part of one. Kael didn't respond. Instead, he slipped the conch shell into his satchel and headed out. The whispers in his soul were louder than his uncle's warnings. That afternoon, Kael explored further than before, beyond the usual beach path, up into the jagged cliffside trails where few ventured. Guided by some instinct he couldn't explain, he found a hidden inlet, a crescent-shaped cove with emerald waters and stones carved smooth by centuries of waves. There, he sat on a rock and held the shell to his ear again. This time, the melody inside changed. It wasn't just Lyra's voice, it was layered with others. Faint, ghostly harmonies swirled together in a choral dance of the deep. Words formed, though not in any language Kael knew. But he understood them. Longing, silence, secrets. As he listened, the shell glowed brighter, casting soft light across the rock. Then, with a faint shimmer, a trail of pearlescent mist spilled from its mouth and began to drift down the rocks, like it was leading him. Kael followed. Through the narrow path carved by water and time, over moss-covered stones and past tidal pools teeming with life. The mist twisted through the air like a silver ribbon, leading him to a deep pool nestled beneath an overhang of stone. There, carved into the cliff, was a massive mural, weathered, but unmistakable. A woman with flowing hair and a tail like an eel's fin, eyes like the moon, arms outstretched toward a man standing on a ship. Between them was a glowing orb, like the very shell Kael carried. Below the mural, ancient runes were etched into the stone, humming softly in the shell's presence. Kael stepped closer. The moment his fingers brushed the carvings, a voice, not Lyra's but older, filled his ears. Beware the bond of land and sea. For when love crosses realms, the tide may take more than it gives. A sudden wind swept through the inlet. The waves surged higher. The shell's glow faded, and Kael stumbled back, heart pounding. The mural had changed. Now, the mermaid's eyes were closed. The man on the ship had vanished. And the glowing orb, the conch, was cracked in the center. That night, Kael returned home with 1,000 questions crashing through him like waves on rocks. Who was Lyra, really? What did the shell mean? Why did the sea seem alive around her? As he lay in bed, the shell now cool and dim beside him, Kael stared at the ceiling. He didn't fear what he was learning, not yet. The mystery only drew him deeper. What he didn't know was that deep beneath the waves, far beyond the cliffs, Lyra floated in a coral chamber lit by moonstone lanterns. She stared into a crystal pool where Kael's reflection shimmered. He found the shell, she whispered, her voice tight with worry. A figure moved in the shadows, a tall merman cloaked in kelp and seafoam, his eyes hard as obsidian. You've broken the law, Lyra, he growled. Revealed yourself to a human. Do you remember what happened to the last who did? Lyra didn't look up. Kael is different. They all say that. But if you do not sever the bond, the council will. And this time, there will be no mercy. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes. But even as fear wrapped around her heart, so too did something stronger. In the days that followed, Kael returned to the hidden cove again and again. He brought with him sketches of the mural he had seen, notes about the strange runes, and the conch shell, which no longer glowed as brightly but still hummed with energy in his hand. He couldn't forget the warning, when love crosses realms, the tide may take more than it gives. But the more time he spent near the sea, the less afraid he became. The air smelled sweeter, the breeze felt warmer, and every sound of the waves reminded him of Lyra, of her voice, her laughter, the sadness in her eyes. Then, on the 5th evening after their last meeting, she returned. The sky was painted in hues of rose and fire. Kael sat on a smooth rock, watching the horizon, when he heard the water stir. He turned and saw her rise from the sea like a dream, hair cascading like silk, eyes gleaming in the fading light. "You came back," he said, heart pounding. Lyra smiled softly. The sea allowed. They sat near the tide's edge, close but not touching. The tide pooled gently between their feet as though reluctant to separate them. "I visited the mural," Kael said. "The one carved into the cliffs." Lyra's face grew still. "You shouldn't have." "I had to," he replied. "You're more than just a girl by the sea. I need to understand what's happening." A long silence passed. Then Lyra sighed, staring out at the horizon. "There are things I'm not allowed to say, Kael. Laws older than your mountains. Stories sealed in the bones of whales." Kael looked at her, studying the grace of her movement, the soft glow of her skin in the twilight. "You don't have to tell me everything. Just let me stay. Let me know you." She turned to him, eyes brimming with something delicate and powerful, trust. And so began the tide of their friendship. Each evening, Lyra returned, always at dusk, always from the sea. Sometimes they met in the cove, sometimes near the tidipools, and once, under the old lighthouse long forgotten by ships. Kael told her about his mother's passing years ago, the loneliness that followed, the dreams he had of becoming a marine biologist, before life steered him elsewhere. Lyra listened with eyes that saw more than he said. She told him tales of coral cities and fish that glowed like lanterns, of sea dragons that slept in ocean trenches, and whales that sang to the moon. Their bond grew, slow and deep, like an undertow. They shared laughter, secrets, and dreams. They sat in comfortable silence, listened to the waves, and once, just once, Kael touched her hand. It was warm. It wasn't until later that he realized how strange that was. Shouldn't her skin be cool, like the ocean? But he didn't ask. Not yet. One night, as they sat watching the stars blink into view, Kael pulled out a folded piece of paper from his satchel. A drawing. It was her, Lyra, as he remembered her on the rocks that first night, hair trailing into the sea, singing to the stars. "I drew this for you," he said, shy. Lyra unfolded it gently, her breath catching. "No one's ever drawn me before," she whispered. "Not like this." Kael blushed. "Well, it's not perfect. I'm not an artist." "No," she said, smiling. "You're something more." A soft breeze rustled the sand. Somewhere far off, a whale sang. "I wish I could show you my world," Lyra said suddenly, voice wistful. "Not just tell you about it." "Why can't you?" he asked. "Is it because you're, different?" She hesitated. "I'm not allowed to bring a human below the surface. The law forbids it. The deep is sacred. And dangerous." "But you trust me," Kael said quietly. "Don't you?" Lyra looked at him with wide, stormy eyes. "I do," she whispered. "More than I should." Then she leaned forward, kissed his cheek, and slipped silently into the sea. Far beneath the waves, in the coral kingdom of Nitharus, Lyra swam through opal arches and shimmering gardens. Schools of fish parted as she passed. She entered the crystal hall, where the sea council gathered, 7 ancient merfolk, each more strange and beautiful than the next. "You've grown attached," spoke the eldest, a woman with hair like braided seaweed and eyes as black as night. "Yes," Lyra said, trembling slightly. "But Kael is not like the others. He listens. He understands." The youngest counselor, a proud merman with scales like hammered silver, scoffed. "That's what they all say. Humans are fickle. Curious now, cruel later." "But what if he isn't?" Lyra asked. "What if love can bridge the realms?" The sea council murmured among themselves. Then the oldest raised her hand. "You have 1 moon cycle," she said. "1 cycle to prove this bond is true. But if he betrays you, or learns what he should not, your fate will be sealed." Lyra bowed her head, heart pounding like a wave against the shore. Back on land, Kael stared at the waves for a long time, the drawing still in his hand. He didn't know about the council, or the deadline, or the ancient laws binding Lyra's life to the sea. He only knew that every time she left it hurt, and that he was already falling in love. Kael and Lyra's meetings became ritual. Each twilight, he'd wait by the cove, and she'd emerge like a spirit from the waves. They watched the moon rise over the water, sang songs, his with guitar, hers with the melody of the deep, and shared stories that stitched their hearts closer with every word. One night, under a full moon, Lyra danced on the wet sands. Kael clapped and laughed, watching her spin and twirl. When she pulled him into the dance, the two of them moved like the tide, forward, backward, together, apart. That night, she stayed longer than usual, resting her head against his shoulder. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. Don't stop believing in magic. No matter what happens." Kael squeezed her hand. "If magic brought me you, I'll never let it go." Little did he know, the moon above them marked the first day of Lyra's trial. It started with whispers. Fishermen claimed to see shadows in the waves, too large to be dolphins, too elegant to be sharks. Uncle Marek warned Kael of strange tides and saltless winds. "Something's brewing," he muttered, watching the sea. "And it's not just weather." One evening, Lyra didn't appear. Kael waited until the stars blinked out. Nothing. Not even a ripple. The next day, he found the shell cracked. Panic surged in his chest. He ran to the cove, called her name into the wind. Hours passed. No Lyra. Only sea foam and silence. Far below, in Nithyrus, Lyra was chained in pearl coral bonds. The Sea Council had discovered the mural's shift. The bond was growing. "She is nearly one with him," one counselor hissed. "If the balance breaks, the tides will rise." "We must sever it," said another. But the elder held up her hand. "Let the cycle finish. If she proves his love true, balance may yet hold." 3 nights later, Lyra returned, exhausted, pale, eyes dim. Kael ran to her, lifting her from the surf. "Where were you?" "I thought." "I was summoned," she said softly. "They know about you. About us." He held her close. "Tell me, who are you really?" She looked up, tears mingling with salt water. "I'm not human, Kael. I never was. I'm from the deep, from a realm below your world. I am Mermaid, daughter of the current, born of coral and song." He stared, breathless. Then he touched her face. "I don't care. I know you." Her lips trembled. "There's more. If our bond deepens, if you fall in love with me, truly fall, I'll no longer belong to the sea. But if you don't, the sea will reclaim me. Forever." Kael's heart thundered. "Then let me prove it." Over the following days, Kael devoted himself to learning everything about Lyra's world. With her guidance, he studied tides, coral signs, even the songs of dolphins. They danced in shallow waters, kissed under starlight, and carved secret messages in shells. Kael built her a hidden sanctuary, a small hut near the rocks, hidden by ferns and vines, where she could rest during storms. There, they shared their first full embrace. Her heart beat fast like a drum in a storm. For the first time, Lyra wondered if love might be stronger than tradition. But the ocean is a jealous lover. On the night of the sea moon, a rare celestial event, the Sea Council came for her. Tidal waves crashed. Lightning split the sky. The conch shell shattered. Kael raced to the shore to find Lyra being pulled back by currents, her eyes pleading. "No!" he screamed, diving in. The waves surged, dragging him down. Suddenly, everything went still. He opened his eyes and found himself in Nithyrus. Kael stood in the coral court, breathing underwater. The ocean shimmered like dreamlight. The Sea Council circled him. He should not be here. He is already bound. The heart cannot unlove. The eldest counselor stepped forward. Kael of the land, do you love her? With all I am. And would you leave your world behind for her? Kael paused, then nodded. Yes. If she asked. Lyra gasped. The council deliberated. Then the elder spoke. One test remains. Prove your love through sacrifice. Kael was taken to the Trench of Echoes, where sea spirits whispered lies into his mind. You will lose your family. She cannot love you as you age. You will never walk again. Kael clutched his heart and thought of Lyra, her laughter, her courage, her warmth. I choose her, even if I lose everything. The trench erupted in light. He had passed. The Sea Council, astonished, declared a new law: love, if true, could bridge the realms. Kael and Lyra were allowed to choose. Do you wish to stay in the sea or return to land? The elder asked. Kael turned to Lyra. Wherever you are is where I belong. She smiled, tears of pearl falling. Then let's build a life where both our worlds meet. Kael and Lyra returned to the cove. Together, they built a sanctuary above and below, part home, part reef. Children from land and sea came to learn. Lyra sang to both whales and wind. Uncle Marek, seeing the truth with his old eyes, only nodded and said, Well, I'll be. Kael kissed Lyra beneath the lighthouse and whispered, We made it. Years passed. One day, a young girl with bright silver eyes and feet that could swim as fast as fish and walk on sand came running to them. Papa, Mama, I saw a dolphin that talked. Lyra laughed. Kael lifted their daughter high. She's got your magic, he told Lyra. She's got your heart, Lyra replied. Legends say that on quiet nights, you can hear singing from Kael and Lyra's cove. A song of unity, of sacrifice, of a boy who loved a girl not knowing she was a mermaid, and how that love changed the tide. Forever.